promise you, this is the last time.
Even though I have snuck some other games into the mix, I have been covering Alan Wake 2 and all of the games that feed into it for about a year now. Alan Wake, American Nightmare, Control, Alan Wake 2 proper, of course, and then the Night Springs DLC. And while it has definitely been a good time revisiting the hits and falling in love with certain entries all over again, it finally looks like this run is coming to a close. At least for now. Alan Wake 2 is over. We got the final draft, Night Springs, and now finally, the Lake House. And I'm not going to mince words. I was not a big fan of Night Springs. 3 chapters that felt largely inconsequential to the larger Remedy-connected universe, 3 campaigns that felt like missed opportunities in terms of raw fan service. Okay, maybe the Timebreaker one got close, but really, you are going to bring a Jesse Faden type character into the mix without having any objects of power to spice up the gameplay? Not the choice I would have made. And finally, 3 chapters that were, at least in theory, meant to expand upon one of the best survival horror experiences I've ever played. But instead we got 3 generic third-person shooter campaigns that all but ditched the spooky themes found in the main game. And don't get me wrong, Alan Wake 2 took pretty substantial breaks from the horror themes quite often in order to lean into more comedic and surreal moments as well. But last year's entry knew when to layer on the tension and when to scale it back, opting to have moments that offered much needed levity in what could otherwise feel like an oppressive experience. But in Night Springs, the pendulum swung too much in one of those opposing directions, and that trademark Remedy balance felt, at least to me, uncharacteristically off. Sure, American Nightmare did this kind of thing over a decade ago, but at least in that standalone expansion, the main game's combat engine had been completely retooled in order to serve an action-first experience. But here in Night Springs, this was simply the combat engine from Alan Wake 2, an engine that was designed for a survival horror campaign, complete with weighty movement. So this push towards more gunfights and nearly infinite supplies felt slow and lumbering in stark contrast to the typically best-in-class action of previous Remedy shooters. All of this is of course just my opinion, and honestly, who cares, right? More Alan Wake is more Alan Wake. And after 13 years in hibernation, even something that came in as a little disappointing was welcome compared to the alternative. And of course, as someone who paid for the season pass as soon as it was made available, there was still the promise of one more shot at the greatness that was Alan Wake 2. The Lake House was still incoming, and even though the details were sparse, it seemed fairly obvious that Remedy had used Night Springs as an opportunity to mess around a bit and explore their goofy side. But once that was out the way, the Lake House was positioned to balance the equation with something more substantial while returning to the dank and dismal. And now that I'm on the other side of playing this new expansion, this is exactly what we got, and then some. The Lake House is peak Remedy, and it offers some of the best moments in all of Alan Wake 2 altogether. It is a survival horror experience that not only expands upon the best bits of the main game, but it also cements Remedy as veterans within the genre now, with a campaign that rivals heavy hitters like Resident Evil or The Evil Within. But in typical Remedy fashion, this expansion keeps things loose and weird enough in its storytelling to serve as a love letter to the fans of this studio's take on the new weird, as established in Control. So with all that said, what is the Lake House? And keep in mind, I'm going to talk about this expansion freely from this point on, so if you're someone that is worried about spoilers, this is probably your time to dip. Play it, enjoy it, and feel free to come back here after you do. But if you have played it, or you just don't care about spoilers, let's get into it. Nestled in a previously inaccessible corner of Cauldron Lake from the main game is this expansion's titular setting. Players who combed the entire area during Saga's campaign definitely came across this closed-off area under the Federal Bureau of Control's, control. But here in this expansion, we finally get to see what was lying behind the gate from the perspective of FBC investigations agent Kieran Estevez. And just in case that name sounds familiar, which it should if you are even interested in checking out the Lake House, Estevez is not only the agent who descended upon the writer during the events of Alan Wake 2, but she was also mentioned in multiple case files by name in regard to the capture of Dr. Emil Hartman, which is at the center of Control's AWE expansion. But here in the Lake House, this is the first time where we get to play as the agent voiced and acted by Janina Gavankar. And if she looks familiar outside of Alan Wake, she's done tons of acting in both film and television. But for the gaming crowd, you may recognize her from her roles in Star Wars Battlefront 2, Far Cry 4, Horizon Zero Dawn, and even Forspoken. As mentioned at the end of Control's AWE expansion, there was an alert coming in from Cauldron Lake. but confusingly, it seemed to be an alarm triggered by a future event. And given the weirdness of loops and spirals and parallel timelines being fixtures in this universe, it might suggest that time is working at two different speeds in and outside of the setting of Control's oldest house. But I'm afraid that that's more than I'm trying to get into for this video. But the lake house starts with Estevez responding to the Bureau alert that was already set in motion, coincidentally around the time that the early events of Alan Wake 2 proper were going down. Our protagonist, who is already familiar with a lot of the AWEs surrounding Cauldron Lake, arrives to the scene fearing for the worst. And she pulls up to the lake house, a FBC facility, looking to get as much backup as she can for whatever this alarm had been triggered by. But when she gets to the facility, she finds it in a very similar state to how Saga found it. No one is answering the gate, and there are no obvious signs of life. The only difference is that Estevez has access, and so she makes her way in. Very early on, we learn that the lake house is a research facility, and the two lead researchers are a married couple known as the Marmonts, who have been conducting experiments and researching the phenomena around the lake. But when Kieran makes her way in, it is clear that the situation is fucked. The facility is empty and under lockdown, and Estevez is able to just walk straight into this government facility without anyone stopping her. And clearly, this intro, down to even the self-awareness of the situation, is a pretty clear play on Control's introduction.
No one wants to check the individual carrying a firearm into a restricted government facility?
And through the use of welcome videos and inter-office correspondence, we start to see that Remedy is clearly back into the lane that they established in Control. From a tongue-in-cheek corporate video that makes it clear that only one person in it is having any fun.
That's right, Jules. But don't let our exciting work in threshold regulation and dimensional coupling keep you from observing the proper safety protocols.
You said it, Diana. We run a tight ship here at the lake house. So, always remember the 3 S's. Safety, security, and censorship.
It's a C. It's a C.
Why, yeah. That is the joke, Diana.
Well, it's a stupid
Wonderful joke, Jules. We'll see you down there.
To a puzzle that has you navigate the IT nightmare of having to change computer passwords on a daily basis, down to a whiteboard that showcases a meeting that was everything but productive. The lake house slides right into Control's lane by not only deepening the intrigue of the FBC, complete with its trademark redacted case files, but here we get an even better peek of what day-to-day operations look like within the organization, in all of its bureaucratic mundanity. And what makes all of this work especially well is how it is directly tied into the survival horror experience of Alan Wake 2. Early on in the life of this channel, I made a claim that I am not really a fan of horror games. As a rule, I don't care much for horror video games. However, what I said then and how things are going now don't really line up with reality anymore. In the ongoing project on this channel of ranking every game that I've covered in these videos, somehow 3 of the games in the top 5 spots of that list are horror experiences, with Alan Wake 2 in the second spot, the masterpiece that is Visage from Sad Square Studios coming in at number 4, and the severely underrated A Plague Tale Requiem rounding out the top of that list. So clearly I was wrong to make that assertion, but after putting a lot more thought into it, I think I've kind of figured out how I came to that conclusion in the first place. I don't like bad design in horror games. Whether it be running around in circles while being chased by a monster, hiding out for a bit only to trigger the enemy again and restarting the process over and over, as is the case with something like Outlast or games of its ilk, or the convoluted multi-step puzzles that only seem to be present in games like Silent Hill and Resident Evil in order to pad out playtime. And the second case is an important one. Puzzles may not be a necessity in all horror experiences, but with survival horror in particular, they are omnipresent, and if we trace the genre back to its roots, they are more or less a requirement. But more often than not in practice, these puzzles feel like bizarre escape room segments. Things like using chess pieces to navigate tunnels that in and of themselves require solving separate puzzles, or running back and forth through a hospital in order to find 3 separate bracelets that somehow end up acting like gears in a combo lock in order to find yet another key to another series of puzzles. At best, these are head scratchers, and at their worst, they feel like time wasters. And all too often, they feel arbitrarily placed into the environments without any real relevance to the plot, or even tone in the larger experience. But here in the lake house, all puzzles lend themselves to the setting perfectly while simultaneously advancing the world building. Take the very first puzzle here for example. The main elevator, the one that pretty much this whole experience is built upon, it requires a keycard in order to get it moving. But the keycard that you need is locked in a nearby security booth. Luckily, there is an override in the facility's head office, well, co-head office, but more on that in a bit. But as you would expect in a government facility, these controls are located on the head researcher's computer, which is currently passcode locked. A memo from IT conveniently left on the desk spells out the need for daily 6-digit passcodes to be updated in order for the system to remain safe. And in something that feels all too real, the memo basically says, pick some constant numbers that won't change, and then change the last few whenever you are required to. So Kieran scours the office, and we are treated to documents that show that the head of research here, Jules Marmont, shares his title with his wife, Diana. And that at least at the time of this promotion, that the couple was on good terms with one another. We see that Dr. Jasper Darling from Control himself was the one who chose the assignment for these two scientists. We see our researcher's diploma, and we are treated again to the banality of government offices by scanning over a Science Fact of the Day desk calendar. And between all of this set dressing, we now have all of the clues that we needed in order to unlock Dr. Jules Marmont's computer. With the solution being the constant numbers, which represent Jules's appointment to his current position, and the rotating numbers coming straight from his calendar. And once you've gained access to his computer, the player not only has the ability to open the locked doors to advance the plot, but you also have the choice of combing through recent emails. And so just here in what amounts to little more than a foyer for this government building, people who take that extra time to read into things can learn quite a bit about this setting and its principal characters. We see that Jules and his wife Diana are obviously frustrated with one another in the introduction video, but we see that things weren't always this way. We see that by the time that this story is going down though, that this relationship has been deteriorating to the point where even basic email chains about annual budgets fall into chaos, with Jules using it as an opportunity to throw his wife under the bus. And that something of a rivalry has started up with both department heads forming fragile alliances and competing research. And all of this is born out of a grounded scenario as simple as trying to get an elevator moving. And pretty much every puzzle in this experience is grounded to its environment in the same well thought out manner. But obviously puzzles, as important as they are in crafting a traditional survival horror experience, they are hardly the foundational bits, with the most important pieces being in the name of the genre. The survival bits are always the easiest to figure out. Survive, face enemies and scrounge up resources, and the second is always the most subjective, making all of this as scary and or surreal to the player as possible. And with the lake house taking place in an FBC installation, Remedy decided to lean firmly into the surreal. But that does not mean that the title is without its own fair share of spooky shit. The structure of the lake house is pretty straightforward, both in its design philosophy, but also architecturally. You have the central elevator, and you have 5 total floors that bore under Cauldron Lake's surface, which means that the lake house is keeping this particular horror trope alive and well. It is your job to explore the creepiest of creepy basements. But at least here, this is taking place in the Control universe, so you already know, expect the unexpected. The lake house is an installation for studying the threshold between Cauldron Lake and the dimension where the dark presence comes from. And this environment is currently being invaded by the machinations of that eldritch horror. Just in your first stop on your descent downward, you experience an environmental shift.
Breach detected in sublevel 5. Staff should seek shelter immediately.
We have a situation in the lake house. All agents converge on the facility now.
The place looks one way for a second, and then it warps into something more surreal and dangerous. And even if you are the type of player to say, nah, fuck that, I'll check out another floor, any floor other than this one, the geometry of this place itself has changed by that point, and the elevator that you just used to get down here has moved. And this becomes a theme in the lake house. This straightforward get to the bottom design philosophy is constantly being subverted. Floors that warp, an elevator with a mind of its own that will take you to floors that you didn't choose,
This is not level 4.
and floors that don't even seem to be in the same dimension that you started in some cases. And, in the most extreme cases, floors that house paranatural entities. And Estevez is placed directly in the thick of all of it. And found within these twisting halls is a new threat to the series simply known as the Painted. While exploring the first basement level, a floor simply called Painting Production, Estevez makes her way through a maze of oversized painted canvases. The whole level is splashed with vibrant paints that look ominous in the low light of this floor, and all of the paintings blocking her way on the level's stopped conveyor share the same abstract patterns, almost as if something were crawling in and out of the works and onto the floor. In order to traverse through this level, a FPC power core is located, installed, and then the conveyor is moved in order to clear a path to the shifted elevator. And while we are at it, we learn that Jules has been working with an, at this moment, unnamed painter in an attempt to manipulate reality. And of course, more on this later, but we also find a video that was filmed during a visit to the lake house by Dr. Darling, in which the good doctor came to check in on this facility's progress while also being critical of some of their naming conventions.
These are the things we need to know to accurately classify the shadow. I mean, that name is not very scientific. I mean, who came up with that? Shadow.
We learn about swiped keycards, and in a tease of things to come, we can spot an experimental weapon trapped behind a locked door. But after this floor is fully explored, and the path to the elevator is cleared, Estevez makes her way towards the next floor, that is, until this happens.
If you can understand me, I am an agent of the Federal Bureau of Control. I can assist you if you take no hostile action against me or any action that can be...
And I'll tell you this, with the majority of the enemies in Alan Wake 2 being riffs on the standard Taken and Cult members, these enemies, known simply as the Painted, they are rad. They look ghoulish, completely unsettling, and entirely unique from anything we've seen in Alan Wake 2 up until this point. And to make matters worse, they don't seem to care about flashlights or handguns, so in this particular encounter, it's just dodging, ducking, dipping, diving, and, dodging.
If you can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a ball. What?
Until you can break away to the elevator's new location. And it's tense stuff. But in a first for this series, Estevez is kind of unfazed by a lot of this, trying to make contact with the entity before she can properly identify it as a threat.
If you can understand me, I am an agent of the Federal Bureau of Control.
Where Jesse from Control stumbled upon the FBC headquarters and is forced to get a crash course on this world, or where Saga and Alan are civilians learning that there is far more to their universe than they originally thought, Estevez investigates this kind of shit for a living. And this moment, it's a small thing, but it really gives us some insight to her character. She's business first to the point where it costs her her marriage, she's tough as nails, and she has a little trick for dealing with the nerves whenever all of this weird shit becomes too much for her.
Okay, deep breaths. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Look, you never really get used to the shit you see in this job, but you can learn techniques to adjust, to function. Take 6 deep breaths. Then get to work. Find the source, collapse the threshold.
Once she gets back into the elevator, she continues her way down. But this time, instead of landing on the next level, she ends up in a strange corridor where she meets a bizarre entity. And once again, Estevez shows that she can fully embrace the strange as she again tries to make contact.
If you can understand me, I'm an agent of the Federal Bureau of Control. I can assist you if you take no hostile action against me or any action that can be perceived as hostile. Do you understand? Well, I'll be damned.
But this entity is wrathful for reasons that will become apparent soon enough. And after this exchange, she finds that this entity and the elevator have shifted once again. It is at this point where I'm going to stop with the beat-by-beat analysis and talk more about the concepts found in the lake house. After meeting the Painted and the sentient portrait, after getting dumped off by an unreliable elevator a few times, the lake house has more or less completely shown its hand as far as new tricks for ratcheting up the dread are concerned. There are still some unexpected moments that I will point out, and the scenario remains both interesting and entertaining throughout, but as far as the survival horror experience goes, outside of these new concepts, the rest of the firefights and running around features the standard rogues gallery. When we finally make it deeper into the facility, all of the remaining FBC researchers and staff have been turned into Taken. This isn't a bad thing or anything like that, it's just business as usual. Stock up on batteries, ammo, and flashbangs, because the trademark fight with light combat is back in full focus. But for my playthrough, and trust me, this is purely anecdotal because I don't have any hard stats to back it up, but here in the lake house, I at the very least felt like resources were doled out far more sparingly compared to Alan Wake 2 proper, and a fraction of the arsenal of supplies that was given to us during Night Springs. So here, on a normal playthrough of this expansion, I often felt more tension in the lake house than I ever had before in this Remedy-connected universe. The common Taken, Flankers, and Assault class enemies were nothing new, but I found myself picking my shots with them far more carefully than even with the main game. And even though Estevez is only armed with a pistol and later shotgun for most of this campaign, this scarcity managed to make the firefights a bit more interesting than I had found them in the past. And even the setting, while it is a pretty basic office space most of the time, its low lighting tied to the bizarre fuckery of the Control universe made it far more interesting than it had any right to be in most cases. And to be fair, this taking of a concept and then repurposing it is kind of a recurring theme in the Lake House, even in its storytelling. And that is because this facility and the Marmonts who operate as co-heads of research are not the most creative scientists. In hopes of understanding and manifesting the shadow, the pair set out on experiments that are hardly original. In the case of Jules, he has been focusing his efforts on returning character Rudolph Lane. Rudolph being the painter who had been living and being treated at the Cauldron Lake Lodge by Dr. Emil Hartman. Jules basically forced Lane into being moved from one prison to another and had been forcing the painter to work to the point of breaking down. And once that happened, the doctor started drugging the artist in order to get him to comply. As a result, Lane's work became more and more abstract, but Jules, who considered himself to be a bit of a creative, sought to find answers in even these strange shapes and figures, with the doctor speculating that the emotion behind artistic works were the force that the shadow was glomming onto. Diana, on the other hand, intrigued by the pages of Alan Wake's manuscript that had been washing ashore at Cauldron Lake, and even materializing within the lake house, she decided that writing must be the best way to channel the shadow. But where Jules sought to, at least on some level, understand the art and its connection to the shadow, Diana just saw the pages as data that could be measured and quantified, and she believed that Wake's work could be replicated and change reality if things like cadence, word count, and tone were matched. Diana had no regard or respect for art or artists for that matter, going as far as to kidnap Ed Booker from the main game, which explains why he went missing during the events of Alan Wake 2, and Diana had him placed in a cell where he was forced to write in something approximating Wake's style. But luckily for Ed, he is a weirdo and believed that this whole ordeal was an elaborate writing workshop.
Where do you think you are right now?
In an immersive writing workshop.
Well, bad news, it's not a writing workshop. Good news, it's not a writing workshop.
Right. It's a government facility studying the power of creativity. That makes way more sense.
And he is still under that delusion when Estevez encounters him in the facility. But what has to be my favorite sequence in anything that Remedy has ever made, we discover a more brute force method that Diana employed. About halfway through your descent is a floor known as page development. This room, as alluded to through technical drawings and bureau documents, features row after row of a new FBC invention, the ATD, or Automated Typing Device. Arranged in an almost endless configuration, hundreds of automatic typewriters clack away, and even though this is hardly the strangest thing that has ever been seen in the Control universe, right away this room fired off something completely primal in my brain. Even before I could understand how insidious this was and how it factors into the plot, I could immediately feel the effects of this infinite monkey cage scenario, and a lot of it comes down to the framing of this scene and its sound design. Seriously, the liminality of this room immediately screams that this place is alien and unnatural. But the clacking keys and zipping of the carriage of each of these devices going off at the same time, you can just feel the coldness of this automation.
Please don't let this be what I think it is. As you know by now, typewriters and Cauldron Lake do not mix. And a room full of them all clacking away. 100% bad news.
And depending on where Estevez is standing, the soundscape at least sells the illusion that each one of these devices is emitting its own sound as it works through its own unique routine. Through further exploration, Estevez eventually finds herself in a room where the progress of the ATDs is being measured and the devices are being calibrated. True to Diana's view of writing as just raw data that is capable of manipulating the shadow, these ATDs were designed to operate off of a sort of machine learning. Feed the machine's data sets based off of Alan Wake's found pages, and let the algorithm take the reins. But when you actually see the outcome of these experiments, it is one of the funniest and most scathing criticisms of AI art that I have ever seen.
Dark, screamed the darkness, a dark reminder of the dark's inner darkness, a well of darkness, a vortex, like black paint, darker and darker, so dark the darkness could hardly see. A dark figure emerged from the darkness, facing the darkness with dark intent. A dark knife glinted in the dark darkly, dark like the dark eye of a dark raven, dark feathers rustling in the dark night sky. No moon, the moon had been eaten by the dark drank it, and the sun, a dark moon rose over the dark.
What the hell is even that?
And other observations by Diana point to other hard criticisms of the intersection of art and commerce. Things like Diana making the observation that between the Bookers, while Ed is a playwright and creates original concepts, and Tammy reports on real-life true crime cases, Tammy is far more successful financially, making her the ideal candidate between the two writers if either of them were to be used to emulate Wake's style, at least according to Diana. The Marmonts are hacks through and through, claiming to understand the art that they are manipulating in the name of science, while both of them are completely incapable of understanding the very nature of what it means to be an artist. And Remedy is obviously directing these criticisms at the industry at large, as the proliferation of AI tools and corporate meddling are becoming increasingly documented. Diana with her shortcuts, and in a scene with Jules where he is shown to have no patience for Darling's criticism of his naming conventions for the shadow, Jules is shown to be a petulant junior creative, incapable of accepting even the smallest amount of pushback.
Rockstar! And he made fun of the name. Oh, the shadow. The shadow is good. It's evocative.
But outside of the pair's limited understanding of creation and their push to further the research, there is another pressing issue that has kept both of them locked into learning how to control the shadow, and that is because of the influence of Alan Wake. In my video for Alan Wake 2 proper, there was one scene in that game that I pointed out for being the single most horrifying moment in all of that experience. And it was the scene where Saga Anderson first found out that the world around her was being manipulated to fit within the pages of Wake's manuscript. Prior to showing up in Bright Falls, Saga had never been there, but through the writer's manipulations, her past and backstory had completely changed. Changed to include her having lived in the nearby town of Watery years prior in a trailer park with her daughter. A daughter who at the onset of the events of Alan Wake 2 was back at home alive and well, but after Alan's changes to reality had begun to set in, a daughter who had drowned years before. And that scene in that trailer where she desperately has to grapple with what she knows to be true while simultaneously being forced to accept what was becoming a grim new reality, that shit is fucked up, it's scary, and even though Wake wrote that stuff in service of getting himself out of his imprisonment in the dark place, what was happening to Saga and her family was his fault. And here in the lake house, we see something similar taking place with the Marmonts. There is plenty of evidence throughout this campaign to show that the two were very much in love prior to this game's events. But when manuscript pages that detailed a rift forming between the two doctors showed up, the couple was powerless to watch as the words on the pages came true and their relationship dissolved as jealousy, frustration, and a bitter rivalry formed between the once happy couple. And the feuding doctors began to keep secrets from one another, attempt to sabotage each other's work, and began taking shortcuts with the experiments that became increasingly unethical. With Diana and her attempts to manipulate the shadow through writing, this led to her kidnapping Ed Booker. But with Jules, there was a far more sinister outcome. In his constant attempts to manipulate Rudolph Lane into continuing his work he was no longer passionate about, Rudolph Lane eventually decided to take his own life. He cut into himself and used his own blood to paint one final self-portrait with his own draining life force. And that painting took on the sentient form that Estevez repeatedly comes into contact with through this game's campaign. But again, these events were written by Alan Wake. And it is at this point where I can finally say it. Wake, even though we have played as him in 3 entries now, even though he is a sympathetic character that just wants to get out of the dark place and back to his loving wife, Alan's attempts have repeatedly cost innocent people everything. Alan has been toying with strangers, ruining their lives, ending some of them, just to serve his own needs. And now that we are here in this connected universe, a connected universe that now includes different protagonists, I think it is pretty obvious that Sam Lake and the rest of the team at Remedy have set up our writer as the biggest threat in this expanding project. Alan is not a good guy anymore. He is the master of many worlds, and this is what his rule looks like, at least for now. And really, it was this realization where I was able to appreciate how far Remedy has come. This is some of the sharpest writing that they have ever done. Whether it be the critical path that continues to fill in the blanks and up the stakes, or even the smaller bits where the team leans into the inner office politics. Seriously, there's a thread running through this game that follows a character that we only ever get to know through emails. And they go from expressing a concern about a nut allergy to them getting demoted and eventually transferred away from the lake house after they were deemed undesirable after meddling in the office's enjoyment of Pi Day. And this writing, man, I was so impressed that I called my wife over to the TV multiple times to show her just how good this stuff was. And of course, it was just moments later that she was present for the one truly clumsy bit of Estevez's inner monologue.
Thought they were untouchable out here, hidden away in the woods? No. Actions have consequences. And I'm the consequences.
But other than that one particular moment, the writing in this game is a fucking slam dunk. And really, everything here is just as tight. As a survival horror experience, this is Remedy's best. The formula is largely unchanged from the main game, but it has been tightened up. And new inclusions like the Black Rock launcher lean into the sci-fi side of the genre, like things like Resident Evil, without going completely off the rails by introducing actual rocket launchers to the scenic setting. And with its breakneck pacing, coming in around 4 hours long without any dull moments, it is able to keep the tension and intrigue at a fever pitch for its entire runtime. As an entry to the connected universe, this title continues to up the intrigue in showing us exactly how fucked up this whole Alan Wake scenario actually is. As an example of Remedy's evolving multimedia approach to their storytelling, the Marmonts are highlights when it comes to their live action sequences.
It's evocative!
And when it comes to connecting Alan Wake further to the world established in Control, this is arguably the best that they've ever done it. Where the AWE expansion to Control was Control as filtered through Alan Wake, with Jesse needing to manipulate light in order to get through certain boss encounters and puzzles.
The light. The light.
All while expanding upon characters from 2010's outing. The Lake House is Alan Wake 2 as filtered through Control. And me personally, I couldn't be happier about this. This world is so interesting, there are infinite creative opportunities, and Remedy is making the absolute most of all of them. And finally, with Control 2 announced and in the works, the Lake House operates as our first real look at the upcoming sequel. Near the end of the game, as Estevez is closing in on the Marmonts and learning about their fates, the agent stumbles upon a light switch cord, and in true Control fashion, pulling it 3 times, lands Estevez in the Ocean View Motel. But this time she is in a section of the lodge that she has never seen before, and as you make your way forward, she comes face to face with Dylan Faden. And aside from just being a perfect bit of fan service, this sequence appears to be our first real look at Control 2. And fuck me, I just need this game.
Tell Jesse I tried. I really did.
The lab.
After playing Night Springs, I was uncertain about the direction of Alan Wake 2's expansions, but the Lake House made up for it in every conceivable way. Alan Wake 2 is better with its inclusion. The Remedy Connected Universe is better with its inclusion. This is the single best thing Remedy has ever released as DLC for any of their properties to date. And I would even go as far as to say that it made me reconsider how I view the whole package of Alan Wake 2. I didn't like Night Springs when I first played it. I'm not going to continue to beat a dead horse. But now with the 3 pieces, 4 if you count the final draft, that make up Alan Wake 2, they all come together in a way that builds up the others. The main game was incredible, the Lake House is a triumph, and now with the Lake House operating as the other side of the coin to Night Springs, I now view that wacky little experience as a bit of unserious fun to balance out the heaviness of its partner. The Lake House is everything an expansion should be. it expands upon its main title in a way that feels integral to its source material. It broadens the scope of everything that sits alongside it, and it even makes what I once viewed as a misstep come across as a fun little foil. Remedy Entertainment has been one of my favorite studios for over a decade now, and between this, Alan Wake 2 proper, and Control, I think that they've more or less cemented themselves as my number one for at least now. And with the stacked upcoming lineup of Control 2, the inevitable sequel to Alan Wake 2, the Max Payne remake project, and even the team-based shooter Firebreak that seems to be Left 4 Dead in the Control universe, I couldn't be more excited for the future of this company. Now, let's just hope that them partnering with Annapurna right before that company absolutely blew up doesn't throw a stick into their spokes. Long live Remedy, I can't wait to see what's next. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you for watching, and if you liked the video, please consider dropping a like, comment, or subscribing. And if you're super into what I'm doing here, please consider becoming a member to the channel. Link in description. The Lake House is one of my favorite experiences in all of gaming for this year, possibly even my favorite flat out. And if there is only one missed opportunity, it is the fact that Remedy didn't make this a standalone release. In a lot of ways, the Lake House could serve as the ideal entry point to all of this connected universe nonsense. Clearly, it is enhanced greatly by being already invested, but I truly think that this thing could be a great place to start for anyone interested. So it is a bit of a shame that you have to put in so much money to actually play it. But as far as nitpicks go, I think I can let that one slide. But what do you guys think? If you were trying to get a friend into this series or just Remedy at large, where would you tell them to start? That's going to do it for this video, so on to the next one. And it's going to be pretty different from anything I've done so far on this channel. So wish me luck, I hope to see you there, and until then, you're all beautiful people, and I hope you have a great day.